Okay.
There we go.
Cool.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Tess. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Sorry, everyone. Hello. Yes, well, this will be probably less of a performance and more of a panic as a speech as well, because there's so much to get through in this lecture. But it's basically to do with the Snettisham Grotesque talk. So Snettisham, as I'm sure you will realise, is in East Anglia here on the northwest coast. And between 1948 and 1991, and a couple of detector finds later, there's been 14 hoards, 11 of which are Iron Age. And the one we are interested in is this one, Hoard L. Now, I should just say at this point, obviously, before the British Museum publishes the Snettisham volume, which is due out later this year, as I understand it, all of this, we are just working off the finds that we've seen. And I'm sure there will be a lot more material comes out in the book. So basically, the Snettisham hoards are generally two types. So we have the kind of jumbled scrap type hoards or the more complete nested type hoards. Now, Hoard L is one of the more nested type hoards, and there were 21 torcs buried in two pits, one cutting the other. And at the base of the first pit were 3 torcs, L19 to L21, that were all piled one on top of each other. This one, L21, was the first in the ground, then this one on top, then the Grotesque on top of that, and you can see them here nested in the ground. Now, the Grotesque torc has undergone a lot of modification and repair, which has traditionally been seen as visible repairs, that this was intentional to kind of mark passing of time. However, we think there's a far more practical suggestion to these repairs. And as you can see, there's been lots and lots of different things done to it. There's a piece of tubular torc been fitted over the back of the torc. We've got pieces of strip wire. We've got pieces of, this is actually square wire, which when you twist it, gets this pattern. We've also got a piece of torc actually threaded through the terminals here. So the repairs in detail, we've got this silver flat wire here. There's a torc being threaded through after that time. This square twisted wire has actually been hooked onto this piece of torc where it comes through here. We've then got the addition of this section of tubular torc, which has been added over a break at the back of the torc. And we've then got more flat silver strip wire with the square cross-section wire over the top, which has also been threaded under the tubular torc. But also in the pit, catalogued with the Grotesque, we've got these spare bits of silver strip wire. Now, when you look closely at the excavation photographs, you can see that there is a piece extra here, which isn't actually there anymore. I mean, it's obviously very fragile, this, so it almost certainly came off in the excavation. And we've also got these little bits which are curved, and they work well as potentially additional bits here or at the back. But what we haven't got is where this bit goes. Now, had it been curled round in the same way as these, you'd expect it to have the curl, but it hasn't. And it's too long, and this one fits far, far better to have gone through and back around. So essentially, we have this spare piece of silver strip wire. And as you can see, it's about 10 centimetres long, so it's a reasonable sized piece. Now, this would suggest, actually, if I go back to that one, this might suggest that this actually went in separately into the hoard deposition, that it wasn't part of the repairs and the modifications that were done on the Grotesque torc. Now, we went looking for the materials that were used in this. And if you look in the other hoards from Snettisham, you can find a lot of suitable materials. So for the tubular torc on the back here, I mean, these are just a handful of them. There's more from Hoard F, which is another hoard, I think about 50 metres away. You can see we've got similar pieces. In terms of the silver flat wire, again, in Hord F, we've got these pieces. For the twisted square section wire, again, Hord F, we've got pieces like this. And also from Hord F, we have, which actually has the same ring terminal on the end, a piece of torc, exactly the same, again, from another different hoard, quite a way away. This could even actually be part of this, to be honest with you. We'd need to have a look close up at both pieces. So with L19, L20 and L21, there's also a relationship in the way that they've been done. So you can see here that the wires have been wound round, passed through, and this is where this missing section comes from, and then crossed back. Here with L21, you can see this has been done again the same. They've been passing the wire through. And again here for this one, they've been passing the wire through. But what's really interesting about this is that this material has actually got little droplets. There's another piece up here of extra material on it before it was used. Now in hoards B, C and F, hoards B and C were two separate hoards, but when they were discovered in 1948, they were mixed. So it's not entirely sure which came from which. You do actually have a large quantity of this material that's been splattered, fused to other material, melted, etc., etc. So you can see back here, here's a piece of it here. And when we look at hoard E, yet another hoard, which everybody knows, the great torc, the piece of torc that's actually been used to thread together the bracelet and through the terminals, here it is here, separated off, actually has this fused material in exactly the same way as we have from another buffer ended torc in Hord F. And if you look very closely at the rest of the main bodies of the torcs, none of these are splattered or fused or have anything else, but the materials used to repair or modify them do have that. So it's almost like you've got two systems going on. Now, the next thing is, how were the torcs repaired? Well, badly, I think is the only way to describe it. And here I've got a little prop to show you. Now, you remember last year us making gold wire. Now, this is an annealed piece of gold wire. And if I twist it around my finger like that, you can see we've got a piece of wire that's 1.7 mil thick that's exactly taken up the form of my finger. Now, what we've got with the Grotesque and with L21 is that, as you can see, the wire hasn't settled around. It's very much standing proud. It's kind of springy. Now, this suggests that this wire hasn't been annealed before they've done it, because if it had been annealed before they've done it, it would fit. It would look far neater. It would have allowed them to wrap the material very easily. But as you can see here, it just hasn't. You've got kinks in it. You've got all kinds of problems. So the next question is, are they capable of doing skilled repairs? And yes, we can see all over the Iron Age that they are incredibly capable of doing skilled repairs that they are trying to hide. They're not trying to make them obvious. They're trying to hide them. So here we have the Sedgeford torc, which the casting of the terminal, it actually cracked. So there's a crack running through here. And what they've done is they've put in 3 rivets to stabilize that crack and stop it becoming worse. And when you actually look on the front of the terminal where these rivets come through, you can actually barely see them. They have tried to hide them. There is nothing about showing repair on this. And again, on the Tor's pony cap, we've got these pieces of bronze used to patch cracks. But again, they've been cut to shape, they've been highly decorated. They're not trying to make it obvious they've made a repair. They're trying to cover it up artistically. And again, even in functional items like the Chiseldon cauldrons, although they have been repairing them slightly more crudely, they are still metalcraft repairs. They are using rivets, they're soldering, they're cutting pieces specifically designed to fit and embellishing them to look nicer. This is not what we've got here. There is no metalcraft involved in this at all. This is literally taking pieces of material and wrapping it round. They're not even using hammers, they're not annealing it. They're not specially prepared materials. These are all materials that have been used for something else and then repurposed. So what we think we can see is happening is that in Hoard D, you've got this ring here, which could equally have come from material in Hoard F or Hoard B and C. In Hoard E, again, we've got this splattered piece of torc, which again could either come from those. And in Hoard L, in L19, 20 and 21, we've got pieces of material being used to modify and repair the torcs within this hoard that would sit very, very happily within these two hoards. We've also got within Hoard L, there's a couple of other pieces that are showing splatter that they relate far more to Hoards B, C and F than they do to anything else. So why are they repairing them, modifying them? They're not repairs, they're modifications. We can't describe them as repairs. Well, in the case of L20, as you can see, when it was in the ground, it looked like a torc. It was the right shape, it all fitted together. Once out of the ground, it falls apart. So are they creating a torc shape which serves the purpose for the deposition that they're making? Now, this is where the panic comes in. This X-ray, which is on display in room 51 at the British Museum, you can clearly see that what's underneath this tubular torc section is a broken neck ring. Now, this is really, really unusual because this is 36 wires you've got here. For it all to break in one place, there is this theory about at the back of torcs break at the back. However, we did some work at the National Physical Laboratory that suggested that actually the stress isn't on the back of the torc. When you look through the other torcs at Snettisham, there aren't any that have snapped due to wear. They have been cut. It just doesn't happen. It especially doesn't happen when you're looking at these multi-wired torcs like the Grotesque, like the Snettisham Great Torc, where the stresses on the wires are being transferred across the spring. There's not one single wire that is actually taking the opening and closing stress. We would argue also that for the sake of the in the case of the Grotesque, if you start for all 36 wires to snap in the same place, would be highly unusual. We need to have a look. It would be wonderful to have a look under there to see whether it's actually been intentionally cut. But there is another possibility that we go into more in the paper that I haven't really got time to now, that it may actually be a kind of metal fatigue that after a period of resting, when the torc has been picked up again, it's actually gone across the back completely. But what we're wondering is if everything that's happened to these torcs is very instantaneous. They don't have metal workers on hand for whatever reason. These torcs have to go in the ground. From what we've seen, Hoards B, C and F, these kind of scrap hoards in inverted commas, are providing material for D, E and L. Now this would suggest that those 6 hoards are related, both in time and location. And you can almost imagine a scenario where they are panicking to find this material, and they're going through before the hoards are deposited. I don't think they're literally scrabbling through the ground, and there's no evidence that hoards were played with after they were deposited. But they're looking for material that they can use in other hoards. It's all, it looks very much like a single event, very carried out in a very short time frame, and probably very local, because if they had equipment to anneal, if they had ways to modify these materials, because so many of the wires are too long for the job or whatever else, they're just using what they've got, they're using it as it is, they're not modifying it in any way. So as I said, what does this all mean? Well, we think several torcs from hoards D, E and L have been repaired and modified. And the materials that have been used to do that have been sourced from hoards B, C and F, either before they went into the ground or as they were going into the ground, perhaps. And as we say, this suggests a contemporaneity in deposition between at least 5 or 6 of these hoards, as there's no evidence that the hoards were disturbed post-deposition. All of these repairs and modifications are carried out by hand with no use of tools or metalworking practices. And the simple nature of the repairs, if compared to the metalcraft of the other Iron Age repairs like Torrs, like Sedgeford, like Chiseldon, would suggest that either craftspeople weren't available or that time was of the essence. The presence of that extra wire in hoard L might suggest, if it can't be actually linked with the grotesque, it may be a kind of offcut, as it were, and it's gone into the pit. It's literally, you've had someone very close by repair, modify, in the pit, and that piece has gone in there with it. And it all comes together to suggest that we're looking at a very quickly enacted event, which may have taken no more than hours or days to execute. So really, although obviously the way that these hoards have been put together, arranged, deposited, there has to be an element of ritual and ceremony involved in their deposition. These particular repairs and modifications seem to be evidence of a kind of practicality and perhaps a very unique one-off event that we're not seeing, because having looked at lots and lots of Iron Age repairs, I've never seen anything like this that really has no skill, no metalcraft, no tools done to do it. So there we go. Thank you. And if you want to know any more, our paper on the grotesque talk, basically, which fills in a lot more of this with all of the examples, is on our website at the Big Book of Talks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Tess. I'm just going to quickly stop your recording now, and hopefully that'll be all nicely saved onto my computer.